So many things that we've been told about healing our lives and recovering from old traumas is wrong. Have you noticed this? The wisdom a person needs to live a good life, to grow past the bad things that happened. I know people knew this at one time, but it's like it got broken up into pieces and tossed up with a lot of other ideas. And I started figuring this out years ago when I used to go to a lot of 12-step meetings. And I went to thousands of them over the years, and sometimes the same meeting every week for years. I'd just go. I would see the same people over and over again. And I had the opportunity not only to work on myself, but to observe other people who were making incredible progress. They were totally changing their lives like before my eyes, and they were shedding old problems, and it was really attractive. And these people were, a really positive influence on me. But I also had the chance to observe people who didn't make any progress. And this really shaped me too, and in fact formed my whole philosophy about how to heal and change your life and how you maybe don't want to approach it. Because you'll notice not a lot of people succeed at healing their trauma. It's not like an automatic given. And a lot of people reach out for help, but it's rare that anybody really breaks through, like really blossoms. It's a huge deal when someone does. And back when I was really struggling with what I now know were childhood PTSD symptoms, I was scared that I'd end up stuck like so many people in the meetings I went to. But I was determined to find a way to do it, to be one of the people who heals and changes. And so I was paying attention and taking notes. And I sought mentorship, not just in 12-step, but in like a few different disciplines. And so when you come to my channel, you'll notice that how I approach healing is something different than what's out there. I'm very direct. I teach people to be honest with themselves, self-directed, have sovereignty over their healing. And I bring in a lot of common sense wisdom, but I'm also very countercultural when you hold up my philosophy, and it is a distinct philosophy along with a set of techniques. But when you hold up my approach against the mainstream mental health world and their approach and their beliefs about what trauma is and how to heal it, well, there's differences, and I want to talk about those differences. Now, I have an open mind to the fact that different people respond to different things, but I think there are some really negative and limiting and even destructive ideas out there. And just in case those ideas are all you ever got and you're feeling hopeless or stuck, like healing can't happen for you, I want to present an alternative that might help you get a breakthrough. Now, I love doing this work because all day I'm witnessing and communicating with people who are getting that breakthrough. And I feel strongly that everyone deserves this chance to heal from their trauma. And I'm very driven by this mission. And I've always been interested in how people who are struggling with depression and trauma can heal and make positive changes. It was so hard to get real information about that for me when I needed it. But I had that breakthrough, and the healing work it's a lifelong project. It's a happy project, but I'm never done. I don't think anyone ever is. It's something we're always working on. We're always, it's kind of like a condition that you maintain. And I'm unfolding as a person, just like you are, just like everybody is. So I have complex PTSD. And now that I know what it is, I can see that I've always had it. I had a rough childhood. I've talked about it in my courses and on my videos. It was mostly because my mother had severe alcoholism, and that brought in all the problems that go with alcoholism. And I'd say the CPTSD symptoms, I first remember them when my mom moved us to a new state when I was 9, away from my father, and I lost him, and I lost my support system. So I was isolated. And it got worse in my teens when I started having sex. And it's common for kids who were abused to sort of fall apart at that point in their lives. And then I got my heart broken. Then I got my heart broken a whole bunch, and then I really got my heart broken in my late 20s. And at about the same time, I was a victim of a violent crime. And also, in the same couple of weeks, my mother died. So I was effed up. I was not just sad, I was scared, I was freaked out. And that's when it became obvious that something was really wrong with me. And there was no name for it. And it also became obvious that doing normal mainstream therapy not only wasn't helping me, but it had never helped. And in fact, I think it was kind of making it worse. So I thought I was some kind of really extra screwed up person. I was convinced that my therapist was judging me, like for, being so unresponsive to things that were helpful to people in normal cases. And they definitely didn't know what was wrong with me or what to do, but they thought they knew what to do. And they didn't really address the self-defeating behaviors that were all over my life and creating an extra load of trauma and drama. Like 80% of my trauma at that point was self-created stuff. There was the childhood that led me to the self-defeating behavior, but those behaviors were then really bogging me down. So yeah, my therapist had me talking about my feelings, about my memories, and it was literally making my symptoms worse and worse. Now, to be fair, therapists back then didn't know what was wrong because there was no name for it. And the name we now know, it's complex PTSD. And that's the kind that comes from chronic exposure to intense stress, usually in childhood. Doesn't have to be, it could be at other times in a person's life. And it seems obvious now, if you know what it is and you've had a chance to check that knowledge with your experience of struggles and healing from what happened to you. But even now, most mental health professionals don't have a working knowledge of complex PTSD. A lot of people, doctors, therapists, mental health programs, they say that they're trauma-informed, but that's really a subjective term. And, what do they mean by that? You have to ask. And what do they propose that a person does if they have CPTSD or trauma? So you'll notice there's a lot more talk about the problem of trauma than the solution to it. How do you actually heal? And that's what my life's work has become. So I hit the end of the road and I was hopeless about all avenues of help available to me. This was back 29 years ago now. And then something happened and I healed. Not overnight, of course, but in bursts. And I had a big burst of healing when I first found the techniques that I still use every day. I've been using them ever since I was first shown. And that's the daily practice. That is a set of techniques. I teach them for free. It's a free course. It's always down in the description section below every video I make. So you can always access that. And I'd love it if you did. If you take the course, you can come join me on free Zoom calls that I lead every couple weeks. So I'd love to meet you there. I answer questions. We use the techniques together. And you can see if they help you as much as they help me to calm your CPTSD symptoms. But back then there was a core hole in my spirit that got healed all at once in a short amount of time. And I had a lot to work out after that, big problems in my life. And I'm still not perfect or perfectly healed, but I don't get into trauma-driven problems like I used to. And when I hit trouble, I know what to do. And that's what I teach here and in my courses and workshops and coaching, an alternative self-led path to healing that can help whether you have access to professional help or not. Now, in some ways, it's a radical approach. Now that I'm writing a book about it, and I realize how much all the videos here are they're like a sea urchin. They're like little spikes of information. I'm putting out one video is a spike and here, and I talk about this and this. And so now writing the book demands that I be linear and that I weave my lessons around a coherent philosophy, which I've known for years. I know my philosophy, but I don't think I've ever articulated it all at once. My philosophy informs every video I make. And so I want to have it all laid out in one place and in one video, and this is it. Are you ready? Okay. I have 8 principles, and the first one is trauma is an injury, not an identity. So we used to think of symptoms of trauma as primarily psychological, right? We now know that they're largely neurological. And by extension, they're physiological, because neurological means nervous system. And your nervous system not only governs, your nerves, your brain, it governs your whole body. And it affects your emotions, it affects your hormones, your immune system, your sensations when you feel like it's time to go to sleep. It governs your physical life. And so when you have a neurological injury, which is what trauma is, it can affect everything in your body. And that explains what we now know, that a history of early trauma can really increase your risk, not your certainty, but your risk of serious health problems. Not just the things that we've always kind of known, like depression, anxiety, bad relationships, we've known that, but it can also give you heart attacks, strokes, diabetes, obesity, reproductive disorders, endocrine disorders, immune disorders, learning disabilities, problems with memory, an increased risk of dementia. Ooh, that one scares me. So there's almost like no bad thing on earth in people that isn't made worse by trauma. So we have every incentive to heal. Okay, so also part of this like injury is that adult symptoms of childhood abuse and neglect ruin lives. They ruin careers, like so many careers. They ruin relationships and they ruin families. The effects of trauma, like we kind of knew this instinctively, but when you really measure it out, if you look at like people who are incarcerated, there's such a high rate of traumatized people in there. If you look at people with addictions, if you look at people with grave mental health disorders, all of it is made so much worse by trauma. So that's starting to be finally dealt with. You know, as a person with CPTSD, I can sort of say like, we're the most expensive people in the healthcare system. And so there's an incentive not just for us, but for the whole system to find a better way to help us. I don't think they've done it yet. They talk about it, they're not there yet, but that's what we're doing here is practical ways to start bringing those symptoms down. And I can definitely say my health improved dramatically 29 years ago. I feel healthier, more energetic, more alert than I did at that age. And it's thanks to being able to re-regulate my thinking, my nervous system, to bring my vital signs kind of back into alignment through using my tools. I use my tools, and that's, again, my daily practice. You can learn that too. The effects of early trauma are more serious than they realized, and they're more wide-ranging. And they, you know, it's not just the obvious stuff. And CPTSD, it can't be cured, but the symptoms can be healed. And I do think of it something like diabetes, where you may have it, but you can reverse your symptoms by changing how you do your day, what you eat, you know, what medicine you take. For us, there also is a way of living that can help turn those symptoms back around. And if you do that, you can have like continued good health and keep going. And then if you sort of fall apart, the symptoms come back. So that's how I experience CPTSD. And if it were to get worse, especially as we get older, if it were to get worse, the symptoms could become more grave. So I just want to like emphasize, it's so important. It's so important to address your symptoms. You may not know what caused your symptoms. You may never know, and that will be okay if you can learn to calm your symptoms. All right, the second principle, dysregulation is an almost universal symptom among traumatized people. People don't talk about this. You may have never been told. But neurological dysregulation, it's a nervous system phenomenon. It can be measured in the brain. It can be measured in your vital signs. And easily observable signs that you might notice are things like difficulty focusing, your heartbeat being irregular, going up randomly or just too high, feeling clumsy, feeling emotionally overwhelmed, or once you've gotten emotionally overwhelmed and maybe, you know, expressed anger that was kind of over the top, then going emotionally flat, like you feel nothing. And even your thinking will be like, I don't care. And there's this weird like silence after intense outbursts. Well, that could be neurological dysregulation if you relate to that. Now, everyone is sometimes dysregulated, and most people will eventually re-regulate, but dysregulation seems to be exacerbated by traumatic experiences, and the brain changes that as a result. And so people with CPTSD will get dysregulated more often, more intensely, and they'll have a harder time coming back out of dysregulation. So luckily that can be healed. But dysregulation is responsible for, you know, a wide range of the symptoms that we associate with trauma. Like, why does trauma cause people to have a higher probability of getting lupus or MS? Why does having a history of trauma make it so hard to heal tissue? Like, I got stuck in the hospital once for over a month. I could not heal. And it was at an extremely traumatic time in my life. And I had surgery after surgery after surgery. And they kept saying, we don't know why, but you're, you know, like, just everything keeps breaking down after we operate. And then I got back, I had left my daily practice techniques. And then I came back to them, like, I just came back and started really working on calming. I didn't know what dysregulation was at the time. I didn't know what CPTSD was. I just knew that I was really freaked out again. And I pulled it way back using my techniques, and then I healed. Then my body healed. And so I've had physicians tell me, physicians who know what trauma is, yeah, probably I was somaticizing my trauma, which means sort of expressing it physically, like the trauma plays out with limited blood flow or, poor immune response to infection. I was having a lot of infections. I kept hemorrhaging. I was having all these problems. And then my body kind of pulled it together. And it pulled it together when I was addressing my trauma symptoms. So again, I did not know that was trauma, but later I looked back and it's like, that's what it was. My daily practice that I was using the whole time. It was calming my symptoms. And the effect when I'm using my tools consistently is always like an improvement in my physical well-being and my mental focus. So dysregulation also has cognitive elements. There's emotional disruption, and I would say emotional, like developmental delays. And so there's like this damage or delay to our ability to connect with other people, our ability to kind of read the room and sense what other people are feeling, how to face up when things are awkward and how to apologize or how to ask someone out. All that stuff, it can get delayed because trauma is it's doing something with the neurological injury that's a little hard to connect. That's what it feels like to me. And it's consistent with some of the research that I've seen. Now, self-defeating behaviors that result directly from dysregulation and from the injury of trauma. Self-defeating behavior, I feel like, does not get addressed adequately. And I don't know, I saw something like 11 therapists, and they were always like very ready to talk about what my mom had done, what the suffering was in my life. But in terms of the mistakes that I was actively making that were making my life terrible and driving people away, I had a harder time getting help. And I don't know if they didn't understand or relate, or if they were trying to go easy on me. They thought it would be too distressing for me to be confronted or criticized about stuff that I was doing to mess up my life. And I ended up, what I ended up learning, my daily practice, as well as, getting some, like a big truth bomb in my face, was from a woman who was a peer who showed me the daily practice. And she was just like, yeah, you have to stop hurting people. You have to stop being selfish. And I was like, what? Nobody had ever told me that. Like, there was a lot of talk about how other people had been bad, but just it never came back to me. And I was so ready, because the beautiful thing, when you realize like it was you who was making a lot of the mistakes, it was you who was being rude, selfish, using people socially. Yeah, I had a lot of stuff going on. But when you know it's you, it's like, guess what? It's something you can change. Now, what my mom did, I couldn't change. My mom died before all this, she died at the beginning of my healing process. Not a coincidence. Like, I started healing as a result of all the pain that was in my life at that time. And that's when I could begin to get honest with myself about the role my self-defeating behaviors played. Some of the attitudes I had were social or cultural, and some of it I learned from my mom. I grew up, part of the time my childhood was in a commune. It was very crazy, druggy, people having sex on the floor, that kind of thing. And, it wasn't exactly a great moral education for me. And it's not like I didn't learn anything about like a good way of life or what was a way to be a good person. There's a lot of ways to pick that up. A little bit from my parents, from some good teachers, friends' parents, TV, good old TV, Where would we be without it? Like, how should I act? What is a good person? So I learned all of that, but a lot of my suffering and a lot of the ways I was doing self-defeating behavior was from cultural messages like, hey, I have to be authentic. I have to be myself. I have needs. I was just kind of like taking those things a little too far. I didn't know any better. So these three, which is dysregulation, disconnection, and self-defeating behavior, they flow into each other and they make each other worse. They can also make each other better, but when your trauma symptoms are getting the better of you, it's usually like a ping pong between those 3 points: dysregulation, disconnection, and self-defeating behavior. Now, all three of those things, there's one thing that activates them, and it's triggers. So learning to calm triggers, and this is the fourth principle, learning to calm your triggers is the starting place to break the cycle. If you can calm your triggers, an ordinary, natural healing process can follow. If you've been trying to heal and trying to heal and trying to heal, and you keep, like, you get 2 steps forward and then 10 steps back, It's probably that your triggers haven't been addressed. And these days, people say triggered, it can refer to anything really, like something you don't like or you disagree with. But when we're talking about triggers in the context of trauma, we mean something that sets off the neurological dysregulation. A stimulus happens, and for reasons you can't totally understand or control, a nervous system reaction kicks in. Your heart's pounding, your thinking gets distorted. Really, if you do a brain scan, left front cortex is going down, less activity. Right front cortex is your emotional center. It's going up. What's going down over here is reasoning. So less reasoning, more emotion. That's what it feels like to be triggered. The way people talk about triggers, it's as if like it's other people's problem that they do it. But what the problem is that we react to stimulus that way. That's the problem. You can learn to calm it. And it's a lot more productive to learn to calm your reaction to things that trigger your neurological dysregulation. Way more productive than trying to get other people to stop being themselves. People are going to people, right? Stuff is going to happen. People are going to overlook you. They're going to criticize you. They're going to reject you. Like, this is always going to be part of life. They're going to not get you. They're going to team up with each other and leave you out. Like all that stuff, like that's hard for a person with CPTSD. But when you learn to calm your triggers, it can't set off that like dysregulation, disconnection, self-defeating behavior. So you can practice this and you can strengthen yourself. Practiced and strengthened against triggers. Now, calming can largely be accomplished through simple techniques that you manage yourself. You don't necessarily need to see a professional for this. These are things that many generations for thousands of years have known about how to start calming down the nervous system. And if you ask me, it should be the first line of treatment. And it includes things like intense exercise, doing something that involves the left side of the body and the right side of the body, like marching. And actually, when you do one of these exercises with other people, it magnifies the beneficial effect. And so that's interesting, right? For thousands of years, soldiers have marched. And then they also will sing or chant together, hey, hey. And doing that together with other people, the voice, the body, it's how people re-regulate. Nobody maybe knew that's exactly what was going on, but people have figured this out. And I think that if people are like fighting in a battle, you bet they're triggered. Their trauma is activated. It's going on right now. And so it's only practical that they learned how to sort of bring their nervous system back into line so that they could manage their bodies and their body systems and pay attention and sleep at night. All of those things are critical for anything intense like battle, right? And so we can learn from that how people did that. Singing together is re-regulating. And then sometimes like a little shock to your senses. It could be like a cold shower or warm hand washing, something that reminds you of your senses. You plunk down in a chair. I have a sheet, and I'll remember to put this down in the description section below. It's a sheet about the 10 emergency measures you can use to re-regulate yourself. Very good to keep handy, like carry it with you. So those are the emergency measures. And then the ongoing measure for re-regulation that I teach is the daily practice. And that's always down below too. So I recommend that for everybody, whether or not you have access to professional help. This lack of awareness or focus or solutions for treating dysregulation is why conventional methods have been so minimally successful to treat complex PTSD. There is poor evidence of good efficacy. It's marginal. And a little bit, you might even question it because, especially where drugs are involved, there's this incentive to hand select the studies that are included in, the measurement of is it effective. And there's ways that you can really jigger the research to make it look like something's more effective than it is. But it's, placebo, therapy, medication, they're all kind of close. And physical exercise, intense physical exercise, has recently been shown to be at least as effective as therapy or meds, or both. And I just remember when I had acute PTSD, nobody told me that. They were ready to just slap me on some medication. And I didn't want to do that because I had had this powerful experience when I first got my daily practice of having my depression go away. But then something really bad happened and I got into like adult onset PTSD symptoms, which had me looping and looping on the memory of the bad thing and going into sort of like adrenal overdrive. My heart would pound. And I was getting worn down. It was going on for a year and a half, and I finally mentioned it to a doctor, and I had been in therapy for months at that time. They were like, oh, you got to get on medication. But I didn't want to, and I said, hold on, and I got online and I researched, and there were a few things that I could do that I thought I just wanted to try first, and it was intense exercise. So for 45 minutes, I would run, or I would like walk up a hill, something to get my heart going and get sweat going. I drank a lot of water. I stopped eating sugar or consuming alcohol, and guess what? My PTSD symptoms went way down, like most of the way. And sometimes if you can go from here to here with those symptoms, from here you've kind of got it. You can, it's no longer getting the better of you, and you can start to manage better. And that's what happened for me. I did those simple interventions and didn't have to go on the medication. So talk therapy is largely focused on noticing feelings and recounting memories. And while this is counterintuitive, talking about your trauma can be a trigger for dysregulation. And when you're dysregulated, you can't really process emotions or memories. Even if you had some sort of breakthrough, you would have a hard time remembering what happened during your therapy session. And that's what happened to me. I would just I remember thinking, oh, this is kind of good. But there would be between sessions, I would just regress. I would just go right back. But it became very clear to me that talking about trauma was dysregulating to the point that it was counterproductive. Now, I recognize everybody needs at some point to talk about what happened, especially, maybe right after it happened, or as you're trying to figure out, or before you've ever gotten validation that, yeah, that's a trauma, that's really hard. You deserve care about that. You should have had something better. So we all need that. There's a brain pathway when you talk about trauma that can set off the whole neurological dysregulation. James Pennebaker, University of Texas at Austin, has written about this. He's done a lot of research on it. Writing about, harsh things that happen in trauma is a way that you can get it out without having to re-trigger the language center of your brain, which is where, for whatever reason, it goes off. It's a calmer way to get it out. And when I've written something like that, I can then read it to somebody. And that's what my friend showed me. She was like, write your fears and resentments. This is a specific technique. So don't just go off what I'm saying in this video. Take the free course if you want to try it. But you write the distressing thoughts, and then you meditate, and then you read to somebody what they are. And that is a way that I can share with another person and get support if I want it about what happened without talking about it. But that really changes the game. And this is where my principles kick in. If you become a member and you join our secret Facebook group, we have one of our guidelines is go lightly with talking about what happened to you. We understand, but a lot of people's first instinct when they get into a healing community is, I just want to tell you what happened to me. And I understand that instinct, and it's what we were conditioned to do. It's what we were told would make us feel better. And if it does make you feel better, by all means, go do that, but not in our community. We're doing something. We can touch on it. You can say, well, I was abused as a kid. There was physical abuse. There was sexual abuse. You need not go into detail with us, because most of us understand. And that way you're communicating what happened, and then what everybody's helping each other with is, and so today what I'm struggling with is trust, or expressing myself, or setting boundaries, normal problems that people with a traumatic past have. And in that we can talk and support each other and use tools together. And having a community of people to help you is very powerful. Now, I'm still talking about the problem with conventional treatment, and I just want to say medication. Medication can interfere with the natural inclination that people have to re-regulate when they get dysregulated. Everybody gets dysregulated sometimes. Most people eventually re-regulate. And what we do in my programs is we keep practicing that muscle of learning. Okay, there's my dysregulation symptoms, the cue, the thing I notice, it's happening. And then we use tools, we come back into re-regulation as quickly as possible. So the goal is to be regulated as much as possible, more, most of the time. Totally changes what happens in your life if you're regulated most of the time. A lot of things that you couldn't previously do, whatever it is for you, be at a party and act like yourself, have a relationship, try for a new job. Everybody has different thresholds of what they can do before they get dysregulated. Well, if you can stay regulated more of the time, the world is your oyster. You can do so many things. Because it's like, oh yeah, I'm kind of, I'm on a date, I'm getting really anxious. You can just go into the bathroom, use your tools, come back out. Nobody's the wiser that you were in there writing and, washing your hands in warm water to get your nervous system back online and grounded again, and go back out there and be yourself again. Like there's this huge flexibility. You could also work with a professional or a therapist, on something if you know how to regulate. And there are therapists who know about that. I think a lot of the tools that people teach for re-regulation, when they're tools that are espoused or created by people who don't have CPTSD, they're not powerful enough. That's all I'm saying, And so I pay particular attention to people who themselves have CPTSD to learn from. Medication, though, it's very imprecise for treating trauma. It has its applications for different mental health situations, but for complex PTSD, there's very low evidence that it helps, like, anti-anxiety drugs and antidepressants. There's a reason why they give those things, but for CPTSD, it just doesn't do that much. We haven't found something that really hits that spot. The problem is that your natural ability to re-regulate and to work on that, I can just tell, like a lot of times when I'm working with coaching clients and they keep using the tools and they keep using the tools and they just can't get back. And I'm like, are you medicated by chance? And sometimes it's like weed or alcohol even. It could be that, but also prescribed drugs and, psychotropic drugs that are given they can make it more difficult to re-regulate. Now, some people, they really can't stop taking, and I would not recommend that anybody just kind of make their own decision to get off. It has to be done with a doctor if that's your choice to do. And whether you do or don't take them, you can still use these tools. But if you're having trouble getting that breakthrough and getting back into a state of regulation, which you'll know when you feel it, it has a very pleasant feeling to it of like alert, calm, attentive. But if you can't get there, it could be that medication is interfering, and that's a longer-term process. But I'm just saying there's a better way, okay? So the standard therapeutic modes of, when you go talk about what happened, talk about your traumatic stories, feel your feelings. If it's more likely to produce dysregulation than healing, we have a problem. Most insurance plans, they'll say, okay, you can go talk to a therapist 10 times. And it's like, you talk about your trauma, you're crying. And it would appear that you're not getting anywhere. Then they go, well, you better take medication. Now you just may have been cut off from the ability to get back your ability to re-regulate, to start working on that. So I feel that the system is broken. The system is misguided. It's not everybody in the system, but it is like the baseline of the system. And so as you're trying to get help for yourself, I just really encourage you to ask questions, do research, read, be willing to try things, experiment with them, but also listen to yourself. And if it doesn't give you a feeling like you're doing better, there should be a feeling of relief, like very quickly. Don't let anybody tell you, oh, this is going to take a long time. And you're like, I don't know, I'm just really going down. Yes, don't listen to that. It has to feel better. Maybe you can do deeper work that feels terrible to look at when you can stay regulated, but I would prioritize being able to stay regulated. Now, standard professional help cannot be relied upon to be the answer. It's cost prohibitive. It's wildly, not standardized, and it's also unproven. And people don't really talk about this, but studies show that when it comes to like how people are diagnosed, there's a lot of variation depending on who the practitioner is. When it comes to how people are treated, there's so much variation that researchers have concluded it's almost meaningless. So what I encourage you to look at is, what are your symptoms? People are always saying, well, I don't know, my childhood wasn't that bad, but I have all the symptoms. Can I come to your channel? Can I take your course? And I'm like, yes, we are about symptoms here. This like direct cause and effect, like my mom did this, therefore I have this. It's not true for everybody. Look at your siblings, right? Different kids in the same family have really different outcomes. Everybody's different. If you have these symptoms of dysregulation, then yes, use my techniques. If you're trying to get your life together because self-defeating behavior has gotten the better of you and you need to empower yourself to make a change, yes, these programs are for you. So, okay, next principle. Conventional beliefs about trauma have disempowered survivors. The power to heal exists in present time. I insist, the power to heal is in present time. And the only aspect of trauma that can be controlled is our own symptoms and what we do about them. Now, if you're actively in a situation that's traumatizing you, okay, yes, other people are involved. But this old therapeutic model urges us to give all the power away about that change by focusing on the past, on talking about things, and relying on professionals to solve everything. And you know what? You get 1 hour a week with a professional, and really, have you ever felt like that was enough? And I just think professionals are perfect for advising, helping, guiding you between days where you've got your own tools, you're working on your own process. And I do think that that is so important. I get told from time to time, like there's thousands of therapists and doctors who refer their clients to Crappy Childhood Fairy and to take my courses, and they come themselves and they get coached. Like, this is for everybody. But there's a few professionals who find it very threatening that what we're doing is like self-empowering. We're teaching each other as peers. We're helping each other. We're serving as a community to each other. We're defining what it's like to have CPTSD, and we're helping each other understand what it is. And we're reading all the books that some of them are not reading, frankly. Nobody can read everything. And so we belong at the table talking about this. And we need to be focusing not only on the hurtful actions of others, but we need to be focusing on ourselves and assessing ourselves for the choices that we make that are perpetuating the harm of childhood trauma, both our own symptoms and then the way we treat other people. You know that saying, hurt people, and usually, people mean different things when they say that, but it's something we have to take very seriously. If we're not healing our trauma, we run the risk of hurting and traumatizing other people, certainly children, but also partners, coworkers, everybody in our path. Healing is so important. It's helping our health. It's helping the way we relate to other people. It's bringing about a sweetness in our lives. It's helping us earn the money we need to adequately support ourselves, which is really important. But because of this focus on the past, what happened, it's left generations of trauma survivors unhealed and locked into this identity as victims. And I understand, as a trauma survivor myself, yes, we are victims, in fact. What happened to us victimized us. Trauma is an injury, not an identity. And so it's just really proliferated in this generation, this identity. It's like, I'm a victim, that's all I am, you have to change so that I cannot be a victim. Well, it just never works. So even if that were fair, which sometimes it is, it's not going to happen. So if you're going to heal, if you're going to be an empowered person who makes a difference in the world in the way that you want to make a difference in the world, it's so important to heal your trauma, to learn to calm your triggers, to reduce the effect of triggers to make you dysregulated, disconnected, and in your self-defeating behavior. So the seventh principle is that healing complex PTSD requires taking your power back. That's your agency. Do you know that word, agency? It's your ability to lead your own life, to make changes, to affect the world. Now, once you own your healing, you no longer have to depend on fallible people and the healthcare system wherever you may live and the methods available to you. They may not be enough for you. You are less inclined when you're empowered like that to settle for stock answers that don't fit. Like the one that I'm always complaining about is how I got told, gosh, you keep making these, destructive choices, my self-defeating behavior. You must want to recreate your childhood. And I just always knew, no, I don't. I want desperately to have a better life, and I don't understand how I keep getting into this rut, and it's, now I know, it's neurological dysregulation. My brain was down, my feelings were up, I was making impulsive choices, and I couldn't understand how I got there. I was having trouble reading the situation. I had an attachment wound that was pushing me into relationships quickly and making it hard to leave because of the abandonment trauma that would come up in there. So, like so many people with trauma, I was stuck with this idea, this isn't helping me, it must be me. It just must be that I'm a defective person. You're not defective. The trauma symptoms I'm describing here are totally normal for people who were abused and neglected in childhood. Now we know. And you are the best judge of what helps you. So it's very important to stay at in the driver's seat of what you're doing in your healing. Confidence in yourself happens, it grows, it develops through courageous experimentation and a focus on identifying and healing the symptoms that you notice in yourself, and then changing your approach to life or the behaviors that are sabotaging you. And you can do this, and it feels great. Like your self-esteem just goes when you make these changes and discover that you actually can. But it takes a shift of focus from the traditional way that people are viewing trauma. It's like, oh, it happened to you, talk about it, and then one day you'll feel better. That day just never came, not through that avenue. So though other people can support us, there's nobody else who can actually make the healing happen for us. Not therapists, not partners, not parents. So don't even wait for them to apologize. Parents almost never apologize. But even when they do, which is nice, it's not going to change that you now have a neurological injury. If you have CPTSD, the damage is there. It's in here now. And so to repair the relationship when that's possible is a lovely thing, but you still will have your symptoms until you learn to calm them. So that brings me to the 8th principle. And this is that character development is essential to healing. And in particular, character development is important for developing the ability to connect with other people. If you have difficulty with boundaries, if you tend to lash out, these are totally common symptoms, right? But they push people away. And so they harm your ability to connect. I've never met a person who has complex PTSD who didn't struggle in some of these ways to connect with other people. And the thing is, not only do you need some healing to have healthy connections with people, but you need some kind of connection with people to heal. And I always say, this is like, I was so sad when I realized this, because I would like to believe that everything in life I can do by myself. But I can't heal trauma by myself. It's a relational wound, and much of it is healed by practicing connecting with other people. So even if your ability to connect with other people is kind of like rickety and has ouchies in it, you just have to keep trying in a titrated way. I have this course called Connection Bootcamp you can take if you want to learn a system, a 30-day program to start practicing that. And then overall, I have a class called Healing Childhood PTSD, which is a great place to start. So most complex PTSD symptoms that we're experiencing today are caused not by the original trauma. And this is, I keep saying this, original trauma did it. We can't change that part. But that original trauma has led to some self-defeating behaviors, and those are causing us to re-traumatize ourselves. Now, it's still not your fault, especially when it's first happening, but I'm here sort of like ruining that innocence in you where you can say, I didn't know, because now you know. Your self-defeating behaviors are reactivating your trauma, are pushing people away. That, the loss of someone you love who rejects you, who breaks up with you or stops being friends with you, or you lose a job, like that's devastating to a person with CPTSD. It's hard for anybody, but that's why it's so important to learn these things, and why making a little change here and a little change there, it really starts to build so that you can maintain good relationships all around, or, start to improve them. It's a process, right? But you start to improve them, and then those good relationships give you more strength for the next move you're making in your healing. Character development is not taught in most dysfunctional homes. It's barely taught in schools, and most therapist offices don't teach it. I have a friend who was getting a PhD as a therapist, and they learn ethics. And ethics, I said, well, what do you learn? And it was mainly like, don't sleep with your clients. And there was very, very limited, you can't give advice to people, and you can't just tell them, hey, stop sleeping with married men. That's what's great. Like Crappy Childhood Fairy, I can say, hey, stop doing it. It's going to make you miserable. It's morally wrong. It's going to make your life unhappy. It's going to gut your ability to have a good relationship. I'll just be in your face. But that's character development, discerning what's right, what's wrong. That's so important to your healing. And that's a lot of what we got robbed of growing up. If your parents were drunk, high, fighting all the time, mentally ill, absent, you didn't get that moral education on like, how do you be a fine, upstanding person? But you're not going to be happy until you are. Like everybody's coded with that desire. And trauma can kind of drive it out of you and make you kind of try to find other ways to get your needs met, but it will never work. You need to be a good person, and you need to be yourself. Those are the two ingredients of being really fulfilled and really happy. And being fully yourself includes bringing your gifts to bear in the world. So there's a fear around addressing self-defeating behaviors because people confuse that with blaming the victim. And every time I talk about self-defeating behaviors, someone in the comments will go, "You're just blaming the victim. You're just shaming people." But I'm not. Believe me, everybody's walking around feeling the shame anyway of what maybe they did wrong and a whole bunch of other stuff that they didn't do. Now, the 12-step model is one example of the centrality of moral reckoning in healing. The point of healing isn't just to feel better, but to become the person that you can be. And that is all about clearing up the mistakes that you've made, the way you've harmed others. Complex PTSD suppresses and oppresses your true nature. And you risk losing forever the opportunity to express who you are if you don't heal. So on a large scale, complex PTSD robs the entire world of the loving and talented and creative person you are, of the participation of so many people who are right now, repressed under their trauma. They cannot bring it right now. And we are all suffering as a result. When you look out at the world and you're like, something's missing, it should be better than this, we've got to make it a better world. Well, who's missing? Like about 7% of the population who is suppressed under trauma right now. Trauma is part of who we are. It's not going anywhere. It's going to be part of our story forever. But healing the symptoms allows us to simultaneously accept what happened and then to transcend it, to become who we were always meant to be, which now includes your greatness as well as your history, your trauma. So many, many great men and women have had traumatic pasts. Trauma hurt them, but it didn't define them. In fact, it informed them, it deepened them, and it empowered them to have compassion and to be motivated to make a difference in the world. Now, true happiness requires that we develop and use our gifts to bring to the world what we're capable of bringing. And then having done that, to create conditions where everybody has the opportunity to develop their gifts. That is a full and happy and meaningful life, and I hope you'll take it to heart. If you want to try the techniques that are the very basis of how I was able to come out of that depressed, bad place and become who I am today so far, I really encourage you to try out my daily practice. It's a free course. It's always included in the description section, but I'm going to put a little link to it right here. You can sign up and learn the techniques in less than an hour, and I will see you very soon.